Hi, I'm Kyril Mbaha, and in today's video I'll be unboxing the newly unveiled Fujifilm X-T4. In my last video, I compared some of the similarities between the Fujifilm X-H1 and X-T3 as well as the differences, mainly for video work, and what I liked about both cameras. I also mentioned that Fujifilm were concentrating a lot on the video market with their upcoming cameras, and in the past few months we've already seen the release of the X-A7 and the X-T200, both aimed more for entry-level users and vloggers, as well as the X100V, a huge upgrade on their X100 series of cameras, and it looks really gorgeous. Now, I had asked them before if there was any upcoming news on the X-T4, which they had none at the time. Or so I thought. Turns out they couldn't say anything as the details of the X-T4 were kept in Marvel spoilers level secrecy. I was fortunate enough to get a test unit to try out prior to its official unveiling and also couldn't tell a soul until it was officially released. Well, it finally has, and I can honestly say it's well worth the wait. Now, before we continue, a little disclaimer. I've already tried out this camera prior to unboxing it, and it's a test model, so I can't confirm if this is all that's in the box or whether there'll be more or less items or whether this is the latest firmware to date. One thing's for sure, they didn't have a manual yet to give me with the box, so I don't have the exact specifics on a lot of the specs, so I'll be talking about the camera based on what I've discovered from using it, as well as what the good folks at Fujifilm have told me about the camera. So without further ado, let's unbox this bad boy. So this is the box it comes in, with the same black minimalist style of Fuji boxes. First thing you'd see is the manual and warranty, which wasn't included in my box, but there is what appears to be an activation code or flyer for Capture One. Next up is the camera. The battery is actually still in this. I really should have taken it out, but you already know that I've tested this camera already, so it's okay. The camera comes with a little strap eyelet thingies. I'm sure there's a better name for them, but I'll resign to just calling them thingies. I'm sure someone in the comments will correct me. Underneath the camera is another box with all the accessories. These include a USB-C charging cable, a USB-C charger together with a 2-pin plug adapter, which is a bit odd as Malaysia uses the UK 3-pin plug. Hopefully the official one sold here will have the 3-pin adapter. There's also a USB-C to mini jack adapter. Why? You'll find out soon enough. And finally, there's a Fujifilm strap. Just from looking at the camera during the unboxing, I'm sure many of you noticed the swivel screen. The swivel screen does make things a lot easier for video work, and I think a lot of people will appreciate it, myself included, though I must admit that I have a bit of an irrational fear with these type of screens because I'm really scared of breaking them, even though it's never happened yet. Knock on wood. But yeah, it's a fear. Size-wise, it's almost identical to the previous X-T3, though I can confirm it's ever so slightly wider and thicker. Maybe a millimeter or two. In any case, it won't fit into my X-T3 small rig cage, so it's definitely not the same size. Now, all the buttons and dials are pretty much in the same position as the X-T3 with a few changes. The Q button has been moved to the top right as opposed to above the joystick, the same spot where the AFL button used to be. And the AEL button is now where the Q button used to be. That doesn't make much of a difference to me, but if you have muscle memory from your time with the X-T3, it might get a bit confusing to begin with. The biggest change for me, however, is how to switch from photo mode to video mode. Now, in the X-T3 and X-H1, the drive dial under the ISO was also the dial to set to video. Not anymore. Now the dial under the shutter speed dial, which used to be for metering options, is now a dedicated dial to pick between stills and video. Speaking of switching modes, whilst the previous X-T3 and X-H1 made photo-specific options unpickable when in video mode, which was a nice little function, now when you switch modes, you get a dedicated menu for that mode. So you can't even look at any of the photo stills options when you're in video mode and vice versa. Some changes have also been made to the slots of the body. The two SD card slots are now side by side as opposed to staggered on the right of the camera. And on the left of the camera, Fujifilm have replaced the single hinged cover to two covers with a bendy plastic thing to connect it. Perhaps to make it easier to leave them open in a cage without accidentally snapping the hinge. The top cover keeps the microphone jack and remote cable jack covered, whilst the bottom cover is for the micro HDMI and USB-C ports. Now you see why there's a USB-C to micro jack adapter? Because there's no headphone port. I'll get back to that one. And finally, in terms of the body changes, the battery port is still on the same spot, but it's a completely new battery. Bigger and apparently better than the W126 batteries that almost all the other mirrorless Fujifilm cameras use. This is the first type of its kind, and this is the first camera to be using it. I have no idea at the moment whether or not this is going to be implemented on the rest of the cameras. We'll just have to wait and see. Now, looking at what's under the hood is a bit hard to say as I don't have the manual, and at the time Fujifilm passed this camera to me, there was also no spec sheet they could share. So I can't say what kind of sensor or processor this is or what resolution the screen or EVF is. What I can say is that both are crystal clear and I've got no complaints about them. And as for the sensor and processor, I'm assuming it's the latest 4th gen one together with the sensor, though photos taken with my X-T4 average at 16 megabytes, whereas these average at around 12 megabytes. So I'm not too sure what megapixels this camera has. Now, in terms of the video modes, a lot of what I love has stayed the same. All the usual 4K options such as long GOP or all intra, high-speed recording, 10-bit 422 HDMI out, FLOG, HLG, all those things, they're all still there, though there have been some new additions. On top of the usual settings, there is now an option to record in either H.264 MP4, which is what we've always had, or MOV format for H.264 and H.265, which I'm sure many Mac users and editors in general will appreciate. They've also upped their high-speed recording to a max of 240 frames per second at 1080p if you're in 24p. Another new option is a switch called Fixed Movie Crop Magnification. Now with this button, you lock the crop magnification regardless of mode to 1.29 times. I can't quite think of who this would be for or what purpose it is, but it's interesting nonetheless, especially since some modes crop more than others, for example, when using stabilization. Wait. Did I say stabilization? Yes, that's right, you heard correct. The thing that I really wished was on the X-T4 has been put into the X-T4 and with extra steroids. Now you can choose from regular IBIS sensor stabilization paired with the OIS lenses if you have them, as well as an additional digital stabilization which will work together with the IBIS and OIS. And if you need some more of a little bit of stabilization push, there's a stabilization boost mode. Now that's a lot of stability for your buck. They've also added a new option when shooting in FLOG or HLG. Now whilst you can still view a film simulation on the HDMI output while shooting in FLOG or HLG like you could do with the X-T4, the X-T4 also has an option called FLOG View Assist, which gives you a color-corrected image on the camera screen at EVF equivalent to BT709, even on playback and preview in camera. So now you can shoot in those modes without using a second monitor and still be able to check a general color and exposure. There's also a movie optimized control setting which disables the shutter speed and ISO dials from accidentally being changed. Now this one's a bit odd for me as you can lock the dials by pressing the top buttons over here. But hey, maybe someone needed that option. On the sound side, there are also new settings to help videographers, namely that you can change the mic jack setting to take either a mic or line input. Now this is something I haven't tested yet and I'd like to know the specs more before testing it out, and preferably with a soundman, as I know this is one of their pet peeves, the poor onboard mic preamps on DSLRs and mirrorless cameras. So perhaps that addresses that issue and I'd like to see what they do with their recorders and their recording equipment and how they would set it. Now finally, in terms of changes in the menu, whilst all your favorite color profiles from Fujifilm cameras are here, 2 new film emulations have been added. Classic Negative, which feels like a regular Fujifilm film stock, like a C200 or something like that, and Eterna Bleach Bypass, a look which is pretty cool, but I used to overdo a lot in mini DV and digital photography days because it was a gritty look I really dug. You can blame Magic Bullet for that one. Now that's a lot of changes to a camera in the span of 1 year. This is not a minor upgrade. A lot of stuff has been added to this camera. Now before we continue, we're just going to take a quick little YouTube break ad, unless you're on YouTube Premium, in which case, these ads don't exist. Unfortunately, I didn't get to play with this camera as much as I'd like to because I was stuck in a pretty heavy post-production job, but I did still have some time to play around with it and take it out for a spin and try some of its features. Now the first thing I noticed is that it didn't take me long at all to get used to it. As opposed to going from an XH1 to X-T4 where there's size and menu differences, even with the swing out monitor, everything felt very natural. Now when I went out to test the camera, it was a really hot afternoon, but that really complemented the classic negative film simulation. In fact, I gotta say, it's probably my new favorite film simulation from Fujifilm, as the colors really complement the colors in my city and the many varied skin tones of the different races in my country. It's got strong saturated colors with a very filmic slant and not as super contrasty as classic chrome or Velvia, though it still has a lot of contrast. I didn't try out the bleach bypass as much, as it's not a look that I think complements strong sunlight, but if I was shooting in a colder climate on a cloudy day, I'd use it for its strong contrast and desaturated look. I tried bringing it out at night, just shooting some random stuff on the streets, and it looks pretty cool. It's just a very stylized look, so it's definitely not a film simulation I would use as much, but for specific types of looks, I definitely would. Now, to put stabilization to the test, I brought my Canon FD 20mm f2.8 lens with a focal reducer to make it a full frame 20mm and get the widest shot possible. And I also brought my 135mm Canon FD lens with a standard dummy adapter. Now, if you've ever used a 135mm lens handheld, you know that micro shakes are completely unavoidable. But with the stabilization on it, it's actually quite usable. Though with the 20mm lens, there's some weird warping in the stabilization when I move it around too much. Now, this may be due to the boost mode, as it states the boost mode is better for static shots, handheld, as opposed to panning and tracking. High-speed recording does look pretty decent, but it also does look soft, especially at the new 200 frames per second. It's still usable, but noticeably less sharp and less detailed than the 4K. However, one thing present in the 200 frames per second mode that wasn't really noticeable in the X-T4 is a lot of heavy moire and pixelation on sharp lines and edges, especially when I was using my Fujifilm lens, because that is a lot sharper than my vintage lenses. It's something to definitely keep an eye out if you intend to use high speed on this camera. Don't get me wrong, it's still usable, it's just, yeah, you really gotta keep an eye out on that stuff. I also tested the FLOG mode, which holds up nicely, as always. And since I'm now using DaVinci Resolve Studio 16 and it can handle H.265 footage, I tried testing out the HLG and H.265 mode, like highest settings, and it really kind of blew me away. And I was shooting it at 400 megabits per second, H.265 10-bit all intra. So yeah, that was a strong image. It really holds up. So at the end of the day, what do I think of this camera? Well, I gotta be honest, and I think it's kind of obvious. My first impressions of this camera is almost love at first sight. Like, there's so much packed into this thing for filmmakers, it's kind of ridiculous. It boggles my mind how much this company listens to people's feedback, to the point that there are options here that I have no idea what they are for. Like that optimized filmmaking mode. It just seems unnecessary to me because, you can just lock both the ISO and the shutter speed on the dials like that and they don't move. But someone must have pointed out something that made them go, you know what, let's add that option. And like I said before, I really like the classic negative film simulation. I think that's gonna be my new go-to film simulation now on the Fujifilm cameras. Especially because I've been looking for a certain type of visual style for KL in the daytime, a certain color, because we have really weird mixes of colors in this city. And the harsh sunlight makes things tricky. So I've been searching for a certain look for KL on a hot day, which I haven't really found until now. This color is looking to be the one for my daytime KL stuff. All that being said, of course, I do have some small issues with the camera, and I'm gonna start with the one that bugs me the most, which is this USB-C to mini jack thing. The whole no headphone jack. I know I went on about this with the XH1, and yes, there is an adapter for the USB-C port to make it a headphone port. But here's the thing. What if you want to plug in an external power bank to the USB-C port while filming and monitor sound? I have issues with this whole one USB-C port to rule them all philosophy that everyone in technology seems to be using in the first place. In fact, I'll flat out say it. I hate it. I hate that my iPhone has no headphone port. I hate that laptops all think USB-C is the end-all port to end all ports. And everyone walks around with hubs for the various cables they need to attach all their different devices to. This ain't boomer complaining talk. This is practicality, okay? Enough with the USB-C port that does everything. Either put in all the other ports, or hey, here's a thought, make USB-C accessories cheaper. Now, my other issue, though it's not really an issue, is the battery. The brand new battery that's Fujifilm have unveiled. Like, It's great that Fujifilm have come up with a new battery with more capacity, but I've got like a ton of W126 batteries which work on every other one of my Fujifilm cameras, except for this one. So that's kind of annoying. I mean, it's an easy thing to get over, and you know, eventually you'll just buy more batteries if this is your workhorse camera, but still kind of annoying because, you know, it used to be like this one battery that I could use for all my cameras. Speaking of batteries as well, the other thing that's kind of annoying is this whole USB-C plug adapter to charge the batteries, as opposed to a dedicated, you know, charger where you just slot the battery in. Now, the other thing that I had a bit of an issue with was the 200 frames per second, because I was really excited to be using that much slow motion in a camera and shooting it for like 5 minutes at a time. But the moire and pixelation and softness is kind of disappointing. It's not detrimental, you know. I had similar problems in certain shooting situations with the FS700, but at least I can roll for 5 minutes straight on this one. So, you know, give and take, and you can definitely figure out a way to use it. It just would be nice if the slow motion 1080p footage looked at least as good as the regular 1080p footage on the camera. Finally, the thing that holds me back from really praising this camera and, you know, bowing down to its feet is the fact that because I don't have enough information about the camera, I also don't know how much it costs. Like, at a guess, I'd say this will probably be a bit more than the X-T4 when it first came out, but by how much I have no idea. Now, if they still stay within the same ballpark pricing as the previous X-T4 or X-H1, then I think they've got a value for money, bang for your buck, all-in camera that would suit most videographers' needs. But if the price is in the Sony A7R region, that's gonna be another story. I personally hope this camera is price competitive because it's a really awesome camera and I want to own one. And at a good price point, I think a lot of people may switch over to Fujifilm for their videography camera if that's the case. But I honestly can't say without all the facts. All I know is, with what little time I've had with this thing, I really dig it and look forward to testing it out more and shoot something real with it. Who knows? Perhaps I will in the coming month. Hey, thanks for watching this video, and thanks to everyone who watched the last video I did on Fuji cameras as well. And if you like content like this, please consider doing the usual subscribe, like, comment, etc. because that's what all YouTubers say at the end of their videos. But more important than that, thank you all for watching. Take care.